Of the 347 positive tests taken that were found today, 297 of them came from staff and residents at long-term care. But we know we're testing more people in long-term care. Shouldn't we also be testing the broader community to get a sense of what is really happening in the community?
There's no question we should. In a standard pandemic, you look for people who are sick, who look sick, you test them, and then you test the people around them. That is orthodox testing strategy in a pandemic. And up until about mid-February, I was very supportive of that strategy. But then it became apparent that we actually have an asymptomatic pandemic. And in an asymptomatic pandemic, it's pointless to start looking for people who look sick. You're really wrong thing. You're literally aiming at the symptom rather than the cause. What we need to do actually is take a risk-based approach. So we've done a lockdown, we've put everyone in their homes, we've taken people out of their jobs, we've eliminated most social contact. So all we need to do now is have a look and say, who is occupationally at risk because they're still at work because they need to be. So we can talk about, obviously, frontline healthcare workers, they come to mind. Of course, long-term care workers, but also people who work with the homeless and homeless shelters, prison guards. I'm really worried about grocery store clerks. I think grocery stores are the most dangerous place for the public right now, and we're not testing grocery store clerks. I would not get into a taxi cab right now because we're not protecting that population either. Now, I heard the Premier say yesterday that we're taking every precaution we can. I think it's important that we do, but I take issue with his verb tense. There's every precaution we can take and every precaution we should take, but we're not doing it yet. And I'm really hoping and expecting that Ontario will move forward with risk-based testing in the community. That would be a game changer for us.
Because, I mean, 347 positive new tests, that does not at all come close to reflecting what's actually really happening in the community.
We have no idea what's happening in the community. We have absolutely not. It's sort of like an iceberg. We know what we can see, and that's what we're testing. There's some quantity that we can't see. It's probably large. And as we're starting to talk about what will it take to reopen, we can't even think about reopening until we have a really good sense of what that hidden part of the iceberg is. All the community testing that we're not doing to find out what the prevalence is in the community, no question.
And in your mind, from the data that you've seen, what percentage would be asymptomatic?
Every time a jurisdiction anywhere in the world does widespread testing or complete testing, they find it's been reported anywhere from about 15 or 20% up to about 70 or 75%. So it'll depend on the population. You can go to a small town and find no COVID. You could go to a particular community and find that 30, 40% of people have it or have had it. So it's quite variable. The population isn't uniform. And the fact is, we don't know.
So what about testing for antibodies? I mean, I know in the US they've been doing that, New York, for example. Should we be doing that to also get a sense of, are we at a herd immunity stage or nearing one? And what is the percentage that you need to reach for herd immunity?
Immunologists tend to agree that around 70% would be the tipping point. Once 70% of people have been infected, the infection will go away. It's theoretical, we don't know, but that seems reasonable to me. Antibody testing, or testing to see who has been exposed and who has fought off the virus, cleared it, that becomes more important the more widespread the virus is. In New York, where maybe 2/3 of the population have been infected, that's entirely possible. It would be helpful to know. Here in Ontario, where the infection rates obviously haven't been nearly that high, antibody testing would be very helpful for occupations at risk. And of course, my mind goes right away to frontline healthcare workers, to long-term care workers, to prison guards, and so on and so forth. People whose occupation puts them at high risk, we know who is safe, who is immune because they've already had the infection. That would be helpful. But there's one other thing to remember too. We don't quite fully understand COVID immunity yet. We don't know how long it lasts. And that's that will take some time to learn about.
Could it be like a flu, where it's every year it's a little bit different and you're still vulnerable to it no matter what?
It's likely to be similar to flu. Both viruses are called RNA viruses. That is to say, they mutate very rapidly. So it's like trying to recognize someone who keeps on changing their clothes when clothes and sunglasses and what have you are sort of what you have to go on. So they're tricky viruses. COVID is a very successful virus, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if immunity was relatively temporary. Yes.
So back to my original question about testing in long-term care. I mean, long-term care, and not to diminish the devastation that has been going through there, but it's a contained environment. Does it not make more sense to test, as you say, grocery store workers, but just random community to see where it actually is and how widespread it is in the community?
If it were up to me, I would do what's called a stratified random sample test, and I would do that every week in Ontario. By stratified, I mean you make sure that you have men and women and old people and young people and apartment dwellers and rural people. You do a cross section of everybody, and you do every week, and then you'd really be able to see what the change is like. Is it ebbing? Is it increasing? To do it just once is going to give you a snapshot, but to do that on a weekly or even every other week would actually have given us a great sense of the progress of the virus. Ontario's testing approach has ensured that we stay as blind as possible to what's actually going on in the community, and that is really unfortunate.
And how many people would you have to test to get a true picture of that sort of random cross-community test?
That's a complicated question. It depends on how you do stratifying. You would probably want to test in the thousands, but you wouldn't need more. You don't need a giant sample. A few thousand, but it depends on your stratification strategy.